How was Biscuit's stomach thing? Did the sister's dog end up needing the vet, or did it settle down? I asked it the way you ask something you already half know the answer to, watching my wife's face over a bowl of cereal she wasn't eating. Jenna went still, not dramatic, not a gasp, just a small, complete stillness, like someone hitting pause on a video mid-sentence. The color left her face in a way I'd never actually seen happen to a person before, not like that, not in real time. What? She said. Biscuit, I said again. The dog. Paige's dog. You said last night you were up half the night because he got into the trash and had a stomach thing. My name is Marcus. I'm 35, I teach high school biology and help coach JV baseball in the spring, and until that Tuesday morning, in our kitchen in a quiet subdivision outside Boise, I would have told you my marriage to Jenna was the steadiest thing in my life. We'd been together 9 years, married 7, with a 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, who thought her mother could do absolutely no wrong. Jenna worked as a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic downtown, the kind of job that came with genuinely long hours some weeks and genuinely exhausted evenings, and I'd never once had a reason to question where those hours actually went. The night before, she'd told me she was staying at her sister Paige's place, an 11-hour stretch, 6 in the evening to 5 the next morning, because Paige's dog had gotten sick and she didn't want to leave her alone with it, and Paige had recently gone through a rough breakup and Jenna had been extra attentive to her lately, staying over more than usual. It was a plausible story. It fit a pattern. Paige was going through something. Jenna had always been the fiercely protective older sister. Except Paige didn't have a dog. Paige had never had a dog. Paige was, in fact, deeply, comically allergic to dogs, something I knew because I'd watched her sneeze through an entire Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier when my brother brought his golden retriever, and Jenna had spent 20 minutes finding Benadryl in our medicine cabinet while making jokes about how her sister couldn't be within 10 feet of anything with fur. I hadn't made that connection the night before, half asleep, half listening to her explain her plans over the phone while I got Sophie ready for bed. I'd made it at 11 that night, lying awake in an empty half of our bed, staring at the ceiling, running the sentence back in my head 3 separate times before the detail finally clicked into place with the weight of a dropped plate. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I lay there until 2 in the morning turning it over, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Paige was dog-sitting for a friend, maybe I'd misremembered the allergy, maybe I was building a crisis out of a small, forgettable mistake in a story that otherwise held together fine. That's the version of the night I let myself believe until she walked back in the door at 5:40 the next morning, kissed the top of my head like nothing had happened, and climbed into bed for 2 more hours of sleep before Sophie woke up. I asked about the dog over cereal because I needed to hear, out loud, whether the lie would hold up to its own weight. It didn't. And the look on Jenna's face in that instant, pale, frozen, caught somewhere between 3 different explanations she hadn't prepared, told me something I would spend the next month confirming in exhausting, methodical detail. My wife had not been at her sister's house. I want you to understand something about who I was before that morning. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I'm the guy who assumes good faith, who gives people the benefit of the doubt past the point most people would, sometimes past the point I probably should. That instinct had served me well in a classroom for 12 years. It had also, I would come to understand, made me exactly the kind of husband a lie like this could survive inside of for a very long time. I didn't confront her that morning. I want to be honest about that immediately, because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. She saw my face go strange for half a second. I know it did, because her own expression shifted in response, and then Sophie came thundering down the stairs asking about pancakes, and the moment dissolved into the ordinary chaos of a school morning, and I let it dissolve. I told myself I'd bring it up that night, when we were alone. I didn't bring it up that night either. Looking back at the 6 weeks before that cereal bowl morning, I can see now how much had already shifted without my letting myself register it as a pattern. Jenna had started staying late at the clinic too, sometimes 3 nights a week, which wasn't unusual on its own. Sports medicine clinics get busy in the fall with football and soccer injuries rolling in, but she'd started coming home smelling like she'd showered somewhere else. Not suspicious exactly. Clinics have showers for staff. I'd noticed it, filed it, moved on. She'd also started going to Paige's more, generally, not just that one 11-hour night, but a steady increase over the late summer and early fall, 2 or 3 evenings a week, always framed as sister time, always tied to Paige's breakup and how much she needed support right now. I liked that about Jenna, honestly. I'd always admired how fiercely she showed up for her sister. It didn't occur to me, not once in those weeks, that going to Paige's could mean something other than exactly what it said. There was a night in late September, I remember it specifically because it was the night before Sophie's kindergarten open house, where Jenna came home from one of these visits and I asked, casually, how Paige was holding up. She gave me a strange half-beat pause before answering, something in her eyes flickering like she was retrieving information from somewhere unexpected, and then said, better, actually. We just watched a movie, it was low-key. I remember thinking, in the moment, that the pause was nothing. People pause, people get tired, people take half a second to switch mental gears after a long day. I filed it. I moved on. Her phone had also changed in a way I noticed without examining. Jenna had never been secretive about it, face up on the counter, unlocked half the time, the way mine was. Sometime in September it started living face down, screen dark, tucked slightly under whatever else was on the counter. Not hidden exactly. Just angled, in a way that made checking it require a small, deliberate movement instead of a glance. I want to stop here for a second, because I think some of you have lived exactly this stretch of a relationship, the one where nothing is dramatic enough to justify the conversation somewhere underneath, you should probably be having. Every single piece looks small on its own. A phone turned over. A pause before answering a simple question. A shower that smells like someone else's soap. None of it, alone, proves anything. All of it together, if you let yourself actually look, tells a story you don't want to read yet. I didn't look, not fully, not yet. What I did instead, and this is the part of myself I'm least proud of in this whole story, was start being extra warm with her. Extra attentive. I planned a date night in early October, got a sitter for Sophie, took her to the restaurant where we'd had our first anniversary dinner, told her how much I appreciated everything she did for our family and for Paige. I think, somewhere underneath the surface of my own conscious mind, I was trying to shore up something I already suspected was cracking, without ever having to name the crack out loud. Conflict avoidance dressed up as romance. I understand that now. At the time it just felt like being a good husband. Jenna, for her part, seemed genuinely moved by the date night, teary at one point, in a way that surprised me, thanking me for still trying, which struck me at the time as an odd phrase, since I hadn't framed anything as effort or repair. I let it go. Everyone has odd phrasings sometimes. I didn't know it then. This is what Jenna told me, much later, about that same period, the weeks I remember as ordinary, and she remembers as something else entirely. It started at the gym. I'd joined Todd's place in July for the rehab equipment access. It's better than anything we have at the clinic, and half my patients train there anyway. He started spotting me on certain lifts, and it turned into these long conversations after sessions, just standing by the water fountain not wanting to leave. I told myself it was just friendly, that everyone flirts a little with their trainer, it doesn't mean anything. By September I was making up reasons to go on days I didn't actually need to train. I told Paige some of it, not all of it, and she covered for me a couple times without really understanding what she was covering for. I hated how easy it was becoming. I told myself every single week that this was the week I'd stop going so often. That's what she told me, much later. I knew none of it at the time. What I knew, sitting across from her at that restaurant in October, was a wife who seemed emotional and grateful, and a phone on the counter that had started living face down. By mid-October, the pattern had a rhythm to it I still hadn't consciously assembled, gym mornings that ran long, evenings at Paige's that had started including the occasional overnight, and a growing gap between the version of her day she described at dinner and the small, specific details that didn't quite fit, a gym bag in the car that smelled like it had actually been used, not just carried, A receipt from a restaurant downtown, dated on a night she'd told me she was home late finishing paperwork. I noticed all of it. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want you to think I was oblivious. I noticed and I decided, over and over, that noticing wasn't the same as needing to act. The 11-hour night at Paige's wasn't actually the first overnight. It was the fourth, over 6 weeks. I only reconstructed that later, once I started actually tracking dates instead of letting them blur together. But it was the first one where a detail didn't fit cleanly enough for me to ignore it, and once that crack opened, I couldn't stop finding others. 2 days after the cereal bowl morning, I called Paige directly, not to accuse her of anything, just, I told myself, to check in, sister-in-law to brother-in-law, see how she was doing after the breakup. Paige answered warm and unguarded, told me she was doing okay, mentioned nothing about a sick dog, nothing about Jenna staying over recently at all. When I asked, carefully, lightly, if Jenna had been around much lately, Paige said, "Not really, actually, we've barely talked the last couple weeks, I think she's just been slammed at work." That was the moment the floor actually tilted under me. Not confirmation of an affair, I didn't have that yet, but confirmation, undeniable and specific, that my wife had spent an entire night somewhere she deliberately, elaborately told me was her sister's house, using her sister's real emotional situation as camouflage for something else. I didn't tell Paige what I now suspected. I made an excuse about needing to run, hung up, and sat in my car in the school parking lot during my planning period, feeling something in my chest do that same slow, deliberate turn I imagine a lot of people in this exact situation have felt, not a jolt, not yet rage, something heavier and quieter, like watching a structure you trusted shift half an inch under a weight it was never supposed to carry. I want to stop here for a second, because I think some of you know this feeling specifically, the one where a single phone call rearranges an entire timeline in your head, and you find yourself sitting somewhere completely mundane, a parking lot, a break room, unable to move for several minutes, holding something that just became real. I went home that night and did not confront her. I told her, when she asked why I seemed quiet, that grading was heavy this week. She accepted that easily, too easily, I understand now, the acceptance of someone who was relieved not to be questioned rather than someone who genuinely believed the excuse. Over the following 2 weeks, I started paying attention in a different register, not accusing, not confronting, just watching with a clarity I hadn't let myself use before. Jenna's gym visits had become almost daily. She'd started using a new brand of shampoo I didn't recognize in our shower, which struck me as odd until I understood, with a discomfort I still remember, that it probably wasn't in our shower she was using it. She flinched, once, almost imperceptibly, when I picked up her phone off the counter to check a weather alert, flinched and recovered so fast that if I hadn't already been looking for exactly that kind of tell, I'd have missed it entirely. There was a Saturday in late October where Sophie, unprompted, mentioned that Mommy's friend Todd had given her a lollipop at the gym daycare when she'd gone with Jenna the previous week. I hadn't known Sophie had been to the gym with her at all, let alone met someone named Todd. 5 years old, completely unaware she was handing me a name that didn't exist anywhere in the story Jenna had been telling me. I asked, gently, who Todd was. Mommy's friend from the gym, Sophie said, already moving on to whether we could get real lollipops too. I didn't ask Jenna about it that night. I filed it, the way I'd filed everything else, but this one sat differently, heavier, because it had come from my daughter, offered so simply and completely that there was no version of doubting it. That was a turning point I didn't fully register as one until much later, the moment a name entered the story from the one source who couldn't possibly be lying or performing, a 5-year-old repeating a fact she had no reason to hide. It took me longer than it should have to understand that Sophie had, without meaning to, done more real investigating in one sentence than I'd managed in 6 weeks of careful, deliberate not looking. I looked up Todd Ashford that same night, after Sophie was asleep. He owned the gym, Ashford Fitness, a mid-size performance training facility downtown, the kind of place with a rehab wing that made sense for Jenna's client referrals. His photo matched a face I realized, with a lurch, I'd actually seen once before, at a work event Jenna had dragged me to in August, a clinic partnership mixer, where I'd shaken hands with a tall, easy, confident man who'd talked to Jenna a beat too long and a beat too warmly while I stood there making small talk with someone else, noticing nothing, filing nothing, because in August I still had no reason to file anything at all. I sat with that discovery for 3 days before doing anything further. Looking back now, that call with Paige is the moment I should have gone straight to Jenna and asked directly. I didn't. I told myself I needed to understand the full shape of it first, the same instinct that had let me not ask about a dozen smaller things over the previous 2 months. Denial isn't weakness. I understand that now. It's a decision, made quietly, over and over, because the alternative costs more than you're ready to pay yet. What followed over the next 3 weeks was methodical in a way that surprised even me, a mild-mannered biology teacher turning into someone who tracked patterns and cross-referenced timelines like it was second nature. I didn't hire anyone, didn't do anything invasive or illegal. I simply started paying closer attention to the small, verifiable facts of Jenna's days, and writing them down. I checked the gym's public class schedule against the times Jenna said she was getting a workout in before Paige's. I noted the days she came home smelling like a shower that wasn't ours. I started, very deliberately, asking Paige normal, unrelated questions in casual conversation, how work was going, whether she'd started dating again, questions that, without my ever mentioning Jenna, let me keep quietly confirming that Jenna's version of constant sister support simply wasn't matching Paige's actual experience of the fall. There was a genuine red herring in this stretch that I want to be honest about, because it cost me almost a full week of suspicion pointed in the wrong direction. Jenna had started texting a colleague from the clinic, a physical therapist named Ryan, with unusual frequency, work logistics, mostly, but enough volume that I briefly built an entire theory around Ryan instead of Todd, convinced I'd found my answer. It took an accidental, completely mundane encounter, running into Ryan and his fiancée at the grocery store, watching them interact with obvious, easy affection, to fully dismantle that theory. Ryan wasn't the story. He'd simply been an unusually chatty coworker, and I'd let 2 weeks of my own anxious pattern-matching manufacture a suspect out of nothing more than text frequency. The real thread stayed with the gym. In mid-November, I found the actual proof I'd been circling for a month, and it came, almost absurdly, through Sophie's school. Ashford Fitness sponsored a youth sports night at Sophie's elementary school, banners, a booth, free water bottles with the gym's logo, and Jenna, who'd RSVP'd for the family to attend together, went unusually quiet and unusually insistent that I take Sophie without her, citing a headache. I went. I saw the booth. I saw Todd Ashford himself working it, greeting parents with the same easy confidence I remembered from the mixer, and at one point, glancing toward the entrance out of pure reflexive habit, I saw him check his phone, smile at whatever he saw there, and text back quickly with the specific, unhurried familiarity of someone messaging someone they know very well. I didn't confront him. I went home, and while Sophie showed Jenna her new water bottle and told her all about the free popcorn, I sat at the kitchen table with my own phone, feeling the last real piece of doubt finish dissolving. That night, once Jenna and Sophie were both asleep, I did something I still feel conflicted about, even now. I looked through Jenna's laptop while it was open on the counter, still logged into her email from paying a bill earlier. I found nothing overtly damning in her inbox itself, but I found, in a folder of photos synced automatically from her phone, a series of images from a weekend trip in early November that she'd told me was a physical therapy conference in Portland. The photos weren't from a conference. They were from a lake house, golden autumn light, Jenna laughing in a way I hadn't seen aimed at me in longer than I wanted to admit, and Todd Ashford's arm visible at the edge of one frame, resting easily around her shoulders. I sat with that photo for a long time in the dark kitchen. I remember, even now, exactly what that felt like, not the sharp, cinematic gut punch I'd have expected, but something slower and colder, like watching ice form across still water in real time, a stillness setting into something that used to move. I want to stop here for a second, because I think some of you have had this exact moment, sitting alone at night with proof in your hands, in a house where everyone else is sleeping peacefully, understanding that the next morning, everything about your life is going to have to be different, and no one in the house yet knows that but you. I copied everything. I built a timeline. I printed the lake house photo, the gym schedule discrepancies, my own notes on the page pattern, and a screenshot I found of a calendar entry labeled simply T, 6 p.m., repeated with unnerving regularity across 2 months. I want to be clear that I wasn't building this to hurt her with it later, or at least I didn't believe that's what I was doing. I told myself, the way I tell myself most things, that I needed to understand the complete, accurate shape of what had happened before I said a single word. Looking back, that impulse, organize it, document it, make it precise before you're allowed to feel it, was the same blind spot that had let me not ask about a dozen smaller things for 2 straight months. I hadn't been protecting myself by staying methodical. I'd been protecting myself from having to feel any of it until I absolutely had to. By the 3rd week of November, I had everything laid out, dated, and cross-referenced. I decided to wait one more weekend. Sophie had a birthday party Saturday, and I didn't want that day poisoned by what was coming. That Sunday night, after Sophie was in bed, I sat Jenna down at the kitchen table. I didn't raise my voice, not at first. I laid the folder on the table between us the way I'd have laid out a lab report, methodical, without embellishment. "I need to show you something," I said. Jenna's face did the same thing it had done over the cereal bowl weeks earlier, a flicker of stillness, a half-second of recalibration, before she reached for a version of composure. "What is this?" I opened the folder. "The lake house photo first. Portland Conference," I said. "November 2nd through 4th. That's, Marcus, that's not what it looks like. The gym schedule says you weren't in a single session that weekend. Your clinic has no record of a conference registration under your name." I checked. I set down the next page. "This is Todd Ashford's public event calendar. Ashford Fitness hosted a staff retreat at a lake house in McCall the same weekend." Jenna's composure cracked slightly, then reformed. "Okay, so I went to the lake with some coworkers. It's not some huge conspiracy. I called Paige 3 weeks ago," I said, laying down the next page, the printed timeline of every night she'd told me was at her sister's. "Paige doesn't have a dog. She's never had a dog. She's allergic. And she told me, herself, that you two had barely spoken in weeks." The color that had drained from her face over the cereal bowl drained again, and this time it stayed gone. "You've been checking up on me? Calling my sister behind my back?" I asked her one normal question. She answered honestly, because she didn't know she was covering for anything. I placed the last page down, the recurring calendar entries. T, 6 p.m. 11 times since September. For a moment Jenna just stared at the pages, and I watched her cycle through something. I recognized it even as it happened, the visible internal search for an angle that could still hold. "It's not, Marcus, it's not what all of this looks like together. Yes, Todd and I are close, we've become good friends through the clinic partnership, but you're building this into something it isn't. The lake house photo has his arm around you. That's one photo out of an entire weekend. Sophie told me his name 3 weeks ago. Unprompted. Over lollipops at gym daycare I didn't know you'd taken her to. That landed somewhere real. I watched it land, watched something in her face genuinely falter at the mention of Sophie, a different kind of guilt surfacing than whatever she'd been managing about me directly. "It didn't start as anything," she said, voice tightening. "It really didn't. It became something I didn't plan on, and I know how bad all of this looks laid out like a case file, but you're acting like I'm some criminal instead of someone who made a mistake and didn't know how to undo it. You had 4 separate overnight covers built around your sister's real breakup," I said, and I felt my own voice starting to lose the careful, level register I'd been holding onto since the folder first opened. "That's not a mistake, Jenna. A mistake is a moment. This was a system. Don't do that," she snapped, standing up now, voice rising to meet mine. "Don't sit there and act like the perfect wounded husband. You've been checked out of this marriage for a year, Marcus, buried in grading, buried in coaching, buried in every single thing except me, and the first time someone actually made me feel like a person instead of a to-do list item, you want to act shocked that I went looking for that somewhere else. Don't put this on me. I'm not putting all of it on you, I'm saying it didn't happen in a vacuum. You lied to me 11 times using your own sister's real pain as cover. That's not about me being distracted at dinner, that's about you deciding, over and over, for 2 months, that I didn't deserve the truth. We were both standing now, both raising our voices in a way we hadn't in the entire 7 years of our marriage, old grievances flooding in alongside the new one, my own resentment about years of feeling secondary to her sister's dramas, her own resentment about years of feeling like an afterthought in a house organized around lesson plans and baseball practice schedules. It went on, loud and messy, for the better part of 20 minutes, both of us saying things sharper than we meant, until we both heard, at the exact same instant, the creak of the hallway floor upstairs, Sophie's door, cracked open, a small silhouette standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, clearly woken by the noise. We both went silent in the same breath. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. I crossed the room fast, kept my voice gentle, told Sophie everything was okay, Mommy and Daddy were just having a grown-up talk, walked her back to bed, sat with her until her breathing evened out again. When I came back downstairs, the fight had drained out of the room entirely, replaced by something quieter and heavier. Jenna was sitting at the table again, staring at the folder, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge completely. "You want the truth," she said. "The whole thing." "Fine." She finally spoke. This is what she told me. It started at the gym, over the summer. Todd made me feel interesting again, not as a mom, not as somebody's wife, just as myself, the way I used to feel before every conversation in this house became about Sophie's schedule or your grading. The first time I lied about where I was, it was small, just an extra hour I didn't account for, and I told myself it wasn't really a lie, more like an omission. Then it became easier to keep doing that than to stop, and I started using Paige's real situation because it was the one excuse you'd never question. You knew how much she needed me, so you never asked follow-up questions. I was terrified constantly. Terrified of exactly this moment, honestly, terrified of what it would do to Sophie, terrified of who I was becoming every time I got dressed to leave and told myself it was the last time. There were nights I'd come home and look at the calendar on the fridge with Sophie's kindergarten schedule on it and feel something close to sick, because I couldn't reconcile that mom with the woman driving to the lake house that same week. I tried to stop once, in October, that date night you planned, actually. I cried because some part of me was trying to end it right then, trying to let that night be enough to bring me back. It wasn't enough. I went back within 2 weeks. I sat with that confession for a long moment, feeling something colder than the anger from 20 minutes earlier, something closer to grief finally being allowed into the room. "The date night," I said quietly. "You let me think that was us fixing something." "I know," she said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you used my effort to feel less guilty about something you had no intention of stopping." She didn't argue with that. She just looked down at the table, and for the first time since the folder opened, neither of us had anything left to say. I filed for divorce in January. Jenna moved into a rental across town in February, and we settled into the particular, exhausting choreography of shared custody, Sophie's backpack traveling between 2 houses, 2 toothbrushes, 2 sets of pajamas, a 5-year-old slowly learning a new geography of home that neither of us wanted for her but that neither of us could undo. Jenna's affair cost her more than the marriage. Word moves fast in a mid-size clinic community, and the professional partnership between her clinic and Ashford Fitness quietly dissolved within a few months, awkward for everyone, unspoken but understood, once enough colleagues had connected enough dots. She lost more than a few of the easy, warm relationships she'd built at work over the years. People didn't confront her about it, but I watched, over the following year, a certain professional warmth cool around her that she'd never fully get back. Paige, for her part, felt genuinely betrayed once she understood the full shape of how her own real heartbreak had been used as camouflage. That relationship took a long time to repair, and Jenna has told me since that losing her sister's easy trust, even temporarily, cost her more than almost anything else in this whole story. Todd Ashford's own life didn't stay tidy either. I learned, months later, through the same small-town machinery that connects everyone in Boise's fitness and medical circles eventually, that he'd been running something close to this exact pattern with at least one other client before Jenna, a fact that came out publicly enough to cost him 2 corporate wellness contracts and a fair amount of his gym's local reputation. I felt no real satisfaction hearing it. I felt, mostly, a kind of tired recognition, the understanding that whatever he'd built with Jenna had never been built on anything sturdier than the same deception it started with, and it collapsed the same way most things built like that eventually do. I kept the house. Sophie stayed in the same school, the same room, the same small, stable geography that mattered more to me than almost any other part of the settlement. And somewhere in the following year and a half, slowly, without any dramatic turning point I can point to, I met someone. Her name is Erin, a fellow teacher at a neighboring school, someone I met through a district training in the fall after the divorce finalized. I wasn't looking. I want to be honest about that, I genuinely assumed I wasn't ready to be looking. But something about the ease of that first conversation, the complete absence of anything I had to manage or decode, felt like relearning a language I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. Sophie adores her, in the uncomplicated way 5-year-olds, now closer to 7, adore anyone who takes them seriously. I don't know exactly where that relationship goes from here. I only know that I no longer feel like the man standing frozen in a school parking lot, holding a phone call that just rearranged his entire life. I know what happened, every piece of it, and I know I didn't look away from any of it once I finally let myself look. There's a version of this story where the real turning point is the cereal bowl morning, the dog question, the moment the lie first cracked open. I've turned that over more than once since. But I think the actual mistake wasn't the 6 weeks I spent quietly gathering proof before confronting her, it was the 2 months before that, the ones where I noticed a phone turned face down, a shower that smelled different, a pause before a simple answer, and chose, every single time, to file it away instead of asking the plain question sitting right in front of me. The red flags were never subtle once I actually laid them side by side. A 5-year-old handed me the affair partner's first name over lollipops before I'd let myself consciously suspect anyone existed at all. I'd simply spent 2 months translating everything into something survivable, because survivable felt safer than true. The lesson I keep circling back to isn't really about infidelity itself. It's about the specific, quiet cost of choosing comfort over clarity. I used to think giving people the benefit of the doubt was simply a form of kindness. I understand now that past a certain point, it becomes a way of protecting myself from having to act on what I already partly knew, a decision dressed up as patience. Jenna's mistake ran on a parallel track. She didn't fall into this because she stopped loving Sophie, or even, I believe, because she stopped loving me entirely. She fell into it because she'd stopped feeling like a whole person inside our routine, and instead of saying that plainly, at this same kitchen table, on some ordinary Tuesday months before any of this started, she built an entire secondary life out of her sister's real pain rather than risk one uncomfortable conversation. What hurts most, even now, isn't the lake house photo or the recurring calendar entries. It's the date night, the version of that evening where I thought I was fixing something, and she was, by her own account, genuinely trying to let it be enough, and it still wasn't. That's the detail that stays with me longer than any piece of evidence, because it's the one that was never really about proof. It was about 2 people who had already stopped doing the small, unglamorous, daily work of staying known to each other, long before either of us said any of it out loud. There's a version of this story where the real turning point is the cereal bowl morning, the dog question, the moment the lie first cracked open. I've turned that over more than once since. But I think the actual mistake wasn't the 6 weeks I spent quietly gathering proof before confronting her, it was the 2 months before that, the ones where I noticed a phone turned face down, a shower that smelled different, a pause before a simple answer, and chose, every single time, to file it away instead of asking the plain question sitting right in front of me. The red flags were never subtle once I actually laid them side by side. A 5-year-old handed me the affair partner's first name over lollipops before I'd let myself consciously suspect anyone existed at all. I'd simply spent 2 months translating everything into something survivable, because survivable felt safer than true. The lesson I keep circling back to isn't really about infidelity itself. It's about the specific, quiet cost of choosing comfort over clarity. I used to think giving people the benefit of the doubt was simply a form of kindness. I understand now that past a certain point, it becomes a way of protecting myself from having to act on what I already partly knew, a decision dressed up as patience. Jenna's mistake ran on a parallel track. She didn't fall into this because she stopped loving Sophie, or even, I believe, because she stopped loving me entirely. She fell into it because she'd stopped feeling like a whole person inside our routine, and instead of saying that plainly, at this same kitchen table, on some ordinary Tuesday months before any of this started, she built an entire secondary life out of her sister's real pain rather than risk one uncomfortable conversation. What hurts most, even now, isn't the lake house photo or the recurring calendar entries. It's the date night, the version of that evening where I thought I was fixing something, and she was, by her own account, genuinely trying to let it be enough, and it still wasn't. That's the detail that stays with me longer than any piece of evidence, because it's the one that was never really about proof. It was about two people who had already stopped doing the small, unglamorous, daily work of staying known to each other, long before either of us said any of it out loud. I don't know if you're sitting on your own version of a phone turned face down right now, telling yourself it's nothing because naming it feels like more than you can carry today. I hope, if you are, you don't wait as long as I did to ask the plain question sitting in front of you. Some lies only need one honest question to fall apart completely. I just wish I'd asked mine a lot sooner than I did. If any of this found something true in you, a person who let you down, a moment you noticed and chose to look away from anyway, I'd genuinely like to know. Drop one word in the comments describing it. And thank you, sincerely, for staying with this one all the way to the end. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but it's a little lighter every time I get to tell it to someone who's actually listening.